Centennial Committee, I'd like to welcome you to the Sauk County Courthouse Centennial event. My name is Paul Wolter, and I'm currently the president of the Sauk County Historical Society. And for the past 2 years or so, it's been my pleasure to serve on the Courthouse Centennial Committee. In 2004, as the centennial of the construction of the courthouse approached, the Arts, Humanities, and Historic Preservation Committee of the Sauk County Board of Directors saw fit to appoint a subcommittee to oversee appropriate and meaningful observances of the courthouse. How many of you were on the square for last summer's event for the courthouse? I can't see any hands, but a few of you. If you're having deja vu and wondering, didn't we celebrate the courthouse last year? The answer is yes and no. Last summer we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the start of construction on the courthouse and opened the 1905 time capsule that was placed in the building when construction started. Tonight, however, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the dedication of the building after completion in August of 1906. The time it took to complete the building is actually longer than the time between last year's event and today. Scores of workmen of various trades worked on the building for nearly a year and a half before it was ready. All in all, it was the culmination of 66 years of Sauk County history and was a symbol of the county's arrival into the modern era. So while we celebrate the construction of the Sauk County Courthouse tonight as a building, it should be remembered that the building serves as a tangible reminder of the system of government that we hold dear in the United States. Its walls were originally constructed to hold all of county government, from the poor commissioner to the county judge. And while county government has indeed expanded, the building still serves today much as it did originally with the courtroom on the second floor. We'll now hear from the Honorable Judge Evenson, who presides in the building and is very acquainted with its hallowed walls. Judge Evenson. Is this one on? I think so. Okay. Thank you, Thomas.
Good evening. This year, 2006, we celebrate 100 years of service and duty of the Sauk County Courthouse. In 1904, even before the destruction of its predecessor by fire, plans had been made for a new and stately building to adorn the courthouse square here in Baraboo. Construction commenced in 1905, and as we all know, and the reason we've gathered to celebrate this evening, is that the building was placed into service in 1906. At the top of the courthouse, above the main entrance doors, is the word lex, the Latin word meaning law, or body of law, or collection of laws, or of jurisprudence. Even though during the planning stages, the construction, and its years of service, this building has been known as the Sauk County Courthouse, and while that name implies the location where court activities take place, in 1906, and for many years thereafter, it housed most, if not all, of the county offices. As one entered the building, straight up the first few stairs was located the county treasurer's office. In the northwest corner was the county clerk's office, and in the northeast corner, the register of deeds. In the southwestern corner of the main floor, or first floor of the courthouse, was located the Clerk of Court, also known as the Clerk of Circuit Court. The Clerk of Court was responsible to maintain all of the records relating to court activities within Sauk County. In the southeast corner of the building on the main floor was the office of the county judge, the register and probate, and the judge's court reporter. The second floor of the courthouse housed the circuit courtroom and supporting areas. The circuit courtroom was a much more formal and ornate courtroom, quite large compared to its county court neighbor located a floor below. This room served as the circuit court room from 1906 to 1962. From 1962 until 1996, the original courtroom served as the county boardroom. With the courthouse remodeling in 1996, it was again returned to its status of a courtroom and is now the home of Branch 2 of the Sauk County Circuit Court. In the early 1960s, the Courthouse Annex was constructed, which allowed for a second county courtroom as well as a circuit courtroom, and also housed other offices and county departments. In 1986, the connector addition was added, which closed in the area between the historic courthouse and the annex and provided additional office space. In the mid-1990s, when the West Square building was completed, many of the county offices moved to that building, but the courts and court-related offices remained. When this building began its service as a courthouse, the county judge was one W.T. Kelsey. In those days, and for most of the century, in addition to the county judge, there was also a circuit judge who handled Sauk County matters as well. The circuit judge generally heard more complex and important cases in the particular county. The circuit judge generally rode the circuit, holding court in different counties in the circuit during different parts of the year. The circuit judge in 1906 was E. Ray Stevens. Judge Stevens was the son of an attorney from Reedsburg, Giles Stevens. Giles Stevens gave a lengthy oration at the original dedication of this building on August 18, 1906, some 99 years and 364 days ago. Giles Stevens also served as a county judge from 1877 until 1882. County Judge Kelsey served for 28 years from 1892 to 1920. Judge Stevens served from 1903 to 1927. There were 14 county judges who preceded Judge Kelsey and 5 circuit judges who preceded Judge Stevens. Since 1906, in addition to Judges Kelsey and Stevens, there have been 18 individuals who have served as judges, either as county or circuit judges in Sauk County, and who have worked and held court in the courthouse. In the late 1970s, the Wisconsin court system was reorganized, and all judges at the trial level became circuit judges. The circuit judge became the single trial level judge or court in the state. The circuit of the circuit judge became the county, and with the very limited exception, today circuit judges preside in only one county, except when periodically assigned to counties in to courts in cases in neighboring districts or counties. An intermediate level Court of Appeals was also created as part of the reorganization of the courts, giving Wisconsin a 3-level or 3-tier court system. Today, any court case from the circuit court, as a matter of right, may be appealed to the Court of Appeals. Appeals to the Supreme Court occur only if that court accepts the appeal. In 1962, a second branch of the county court was created to handle the increased judicial workload. In 1988, a third branch of the circuit court was created. Today, Sauk County has 3 circuit judges and a full-time court commissioner, with preliminary plans being made for a 4th circuit court. Records in the Clerk of Court's office indicate that in 1906, 56 civil cases were filed. Indexes for family, divorce, and criminal cases could not be located. By way of comparison to the 56 cases filed in 1906, in 2005, there were 851 civil cases filed in the county, 424 family cases, 498 felony cases, 1,280 misdemeanor cases, 703 criminal traffic cases or misdemeanor cases involving motor vehicles, 9,997 traffic cases, and 3,780 forfeiture or ordinance cases. I surmise that when the courthouse was constructed in 1906 and the automobile or horseless carriage industry was in its infancy, that few had foreseen a need for a weekly traffic court, which we now hold today. And with all of that being said, this evening we gather once again to celebrate the long and storied history of the Sauk County Courthouse. It has served the county well. It will continue to serve it for generations to come. It is a representation of our way of life and our democracy. As this stately structure begins its 2nd century of service to the citizens of Sauk County, let us remember and always keep in mind that while this building is an impressive physical structure, its significance goes far beyond the structure itself. The building has and continues to stand as a symbol of the principles and truths that we as Americans hold so dear. No matter what the political climate nor the personal beliefs that we each hold, we must continue to honor the uprightness of the law and to insist upon fair, honest, impartial, and equal justice for all who enter the doors of the Sauk County Courthouse. Adherence to this commitment, no matter how trying the times, will be the greatest tribute that we can provide to this building, to ourselves, to our freedom, and to our way of life. Thank you.
A centennial anniversary is indeed a good time to look back and reflect on the past. The 100th anniversary of the current Sauk County Courthouse provides our generation with the opportunity and obligation to remember and relate the circumstances that brought about this very occasion. To that end, I would like to introduce our very talented songwriter and artist who has created original music to share with us tonight to help us remember some of the interesting moments in early Sauk County history and justice that led up to the construction of the current Sauk County Courthouse. Would you please help me welcome Mr. Christopher Powers.
Well, thank you all for coming out for the big celebration here, 100 years of the Sauk County Courthouses. Kind of think back to a day back in 1904. It was a cold, cold day in December 27th, 1904, and as a bartender just got off work about 11 o'clock at night, he's heading for home, and he saw some flames coming out of the upper floors of the courthouse. He was the first one to spot that courthouse fire in the old brick courthouse. The fire department came by. It was a cold, cold night, sub-zero temperatures and gale force winds. And the fire department did everything they could. Basically, the best thing they could do was to keep the vaults cool so the records wouldn't burn up. By the morning, the old brick courthouse was nothing but a shell. Fortunately, the money had already been approved for the new courthouse, which started construction pretty soon in spring. And actually, the county board had to meet for 20 months in the city hall before that new courthouse was built. The people kept waiting for the courthouse to be finished. They sing a song that went something like this. Gonna build a courthouse, one that's sure to stand, gonna build a courthouse if it costs $100 grand. Build a brand new courthouse in the middle of our town. Build it out of steel and stone and it won't burn down. It's gonna have electric lights, can work all day and night. It's gonna have a steam heat, can warm your nose, can thaw your feet. Modern plumbing on every floor, won't have to go to the cellar no more. Life could be so great, it could be right up to date if we build a courthouse. I think I've made it clear we're gonna build a courthouse. It's gonna last 100 years. I'll build a brand new courthouse in the middle of our town. Build it up real quick before the old one tumbles down. Oh, we'll build it up real quick, we'll burn the old one down. Well, thank you very much. The early settlers, when they came out to this part of the world, the country was only about 50 years old or so. Pretty much a brand new country, and they came out. There was not much settlement, not much white settlement anyway in this part of the world. There was a fort up at Green Bay that was called Fort Howard, and there's a fur trading companies were up there, of course. And then there was a fort down on the Mississippi River in Prairie du Chien, a fort called Fort Crawford. And then people would come up from Fort Crawford up the Wisconsin River, and they'd come down from Green Bay on the Fox River, and they would meet up in a place called Portage. It's a French word. It means you pick up your canoe and carry through the woods for about 2 miles and move from one river to another. And during the Black Hawk Uprising, there's a lot of concern about that, and so they built a fort at Portage called Fort Winnebago, And that was the area where some of the earlier settlers came in and wound up in this part of our state here in Baraboo. And people like, people like Eben and Rosalind Peck and people like Abe Wood and Wallace Rowan and the Count Harasley, they all settled into this part of the state. Now it was back in those days, of course, they didn't have courts and lawyers, the black robe judges and the slick talking lawyers and the juries and jailers and all the things we think about when we think about modern justice. They had to sort of settle things the old-fashioned way, a kind of justice that they called frontier justice. That was the name that they used for it. I remember the first lawsuit in Baraboo was between a couple of guys, Archibald Barker and a captain by the name of Findley. And Justice D.C. Barry was the justice of the peace, and he got to listen to these guys. They'd been arguing for a couple of years and built up some animosity between them, and they decided that they were going to have a lawsuit and have a judge settle it. So Mr. Barry listened to them for a while, and he figured out, well, he said, only way we're going to settle this is the old-fashioned way with a duel. I got a couple of pistols I just had made out of old gun barrel, and I think those will make excellent dueling pistols. And he gave a sort of a knowing wink to Archibald Barker. And Barker immediately said, well, I need to use my old shotgun. And the judge said that'd be fine. So the day came, the hour came for the duel, and two stood back to back, took 10 paces in either direction. And on the order from the judge, wheel and fire, Barker turned around and blasted away with both barrels, and Captain Findley cried out, "I'm hit!" What he didn't know, of course, was that D.C. Barry and the other second had loaded both guns with powder only. They didn't use the bullets, the little lead balls, which are that's what'll put a hole in a person, you know. They didn't use those. It was just powder only, and Captain Findley soon discovered the joke, and he and Barker went down and settled it over a bottle of whiskey, which is another way of doing things the old-fashioned way, I think. And anyway, back in those days, of course, people had to have this pioneer spirit. It's a spirit of hard work and self-reliance and common sense, you know. But also the wildness of the area attracted some wild and boisterous spirits who wouldn't have been so accepted back in polite society back east. It makes me think of one of the first people to move here, a fellow by the name of Abraham Wood, who was a fairly upstanding citizen when he was sober, but when he was drunk, he could be more than a handful. Come out of Kentucky, and he says he got a brother on the Illinois shore. Travels up north with a little bit of luck, he might make a little money on a Black Hawk war. Talk about Abe Wood, you tell me he was no good. Yeah, but it can't be true, that's the first family in Baraboo. Now up by the Portage, Abe got a little shop. The Pawnee Braves go to trade for supplies. One tries to rob him and Abe hollers stop. And in the fight that follows, that Pawnee dies. The Indians gather all around a cabin. Justice of the peace hollers, run for your life. Run for your life, Abe. Old Abe Wood, he got no plans for leaving. He takes the chief's daughter as his lawful wedded wife. They're talking about Abe Wood, tell me he was no good. Well, people, that can't be true. That's the first family in Baraboo. Now one night Abe is a-feeling kinda thirsty. One little drink won't do me no harm. Just gotta think of who might have something. Steals a keg of beer from the Webster farm. Now Webster's wife stops him in the kitchen, grabs him by the shirt, try to make him stand still. Now old Abe Wood, he keep right on walking, says, hang fast, madam, and I'll drag you straight to hell. It's all about Abe Wood, you can tell me he was no good. People, that it can't be true, that's the first family of Baraboo. Baraboo rushers going down the Mississippi on a steamboat ride. A man falls sick, the rushers run to help him, take him to a doctor on the Illinois side. And scared of getting sick, that steamboat captain casts off quick, gonna leave them all behind. The Baraboo rushers come swimming up beside them and hijack the steamboat and take it for a ride. It's all about Abe Wood. You tell me he was no good. I'll tell you that it can't be true. That's the first family of Baraboo. Yeah, it's all about Abe Wood. Tell you that it can't be true. That's the first family of Baraboo. Talk about Abe Wood. All right, thank you very much. Well, of course, if you're going to have a system of justice, you've got to have a jail as well, right? And when the first jail was proposed, it was going to be just a beautiful jail. In 1844, it was going to have 3-foot thick limestone walls and oak flooring about a foot thick as well, and iron, inch-wide iron bars on the windows. But of course, the county people of Baraboo weren't really sure that this was going to get to remain the county seat. And so instead they erected a temporary jail. It was made out of logs. It was like a big log cabin, had a plank floor. And Abe Wood was one of the first people who got to try it out. He was apparently incarcerated for trying to shoot a land agent, and they didn't think that they thought he should be locked up for that, and he didn't agree, so he pried up one of the floorboards, used it as a shovel, and dug his way out and went home and slept in his own bed. But eventually they did tear that jailhouse down. It apparently had problems with noxious fumes, what they call noxious fumes. I don't know where those would come from. But they had to sometimes send the prisoners up to Columbia County, and that was sort of embarrassing. And other times they put them up in the Western Hotel. There's a story of a cow thief. It's one of the worst things you could probably do in Wisconsin, to be a cow thief. And this cow thief was tried, and they wound up putting him up because he couldn't stay in the jail. They put him up in the Western Hotel. He got to sleep on clean sheets, and he'd wake up in the morning and spend the morning gossiping with clerks and merchants, and then he'd have a big meal of the day, a big dinner at lunchtime, and then he'd hang around the lobby for a while and chat with people for the afternoon until tea time, and he'd go to bed at a decent hour and wake up the next day and start all over again. And the sheriff didn't think that this was really probably the best way of punishment, that he was actually learning a good lesson this way. So the sheriff said, well, you've got to come on out to the farm and do some work for me out at the farm. And the cow thief said, well, no, I've been tried justly and sentenced, and the county's responsible for taking care of me for the next few months. Well, shortly after that, they did build the new jail, the new hexagonal jail. But one of the early pioneers who had a chance to try out the new system of justice was Miss Rosalind Peck. Now, Rosalind's a very famous person around here in Baraboo. There's a street named after her called Rosalind Street, and she and her husband Eben started a public house down by Madison in the early days, and they decided they would settle down here. And she came in about the same time as most of the early settlers, with Abe Wood and Wallace Rowan and the Count Harasty, and she wound up outlasting them all within 10 years. Her husband Eben started a couple of the mills, the first mills on the Baraboo River, and he later on started the first public school here, and he was a justice of the peace. He was the one that performed the ceremony when Abe Wood got married, and he was a very enterprising fellow. He decided he was going to go out to Pikes Peak and try to find some gold, and during that journey, several of the people in his party, the word came back that they'd been killed by Indians during the journey, but there's no actual death certificate for Eben. This put Rosalind into a very interesting state of affair with her two little children. As a widow, she could of course own property, but as a married woman, she was not allowed to own property. So since there was no death certificate, she was sort of in this state of limbo. And it was at this time that the United States of America stepped in and made things a little bit more difficult because, stay with me here, the United States of America would own all of the land, of course, in North America was Indian land originally, and the United States government would find a way to buy it or to get the Indians to move out, and they kept moving them further and further westward. And then once they had bought the land, they would put it up for sale, usually giving people about 6 months' notice, so that if you had cleared the land and you had improved it and put up buildings on it, that you had a chance. You had 6 months' notice. You could get the money together to actually buy it. But this time, for some reason, they didn't do that. And this is when the people of Baraboo, who had actually made claims, put together what they called the Bearable Claimants Association. They met, and Abe Wood, of course, was one of them. There were 56 of them all together, and they got together to, they pledged to protect each other in our prospective claims to the best of our power. Or if they'd had a song about it, they probably would have had this song. Well, we gathered together in common frustration, target of this federal regulation, wide open to outside speculation. Guard your homes and your farms from exploitation. When you wind up in a no-win situation, you deserve a fair share of compensation. So don't be the victim of intimidation. Join the Baraboo Claimants Association. Yeah. So that would have been their song, I guess. Well, 10 months later, they got together and met and had a new declaration. There were only 3 of the claims that were in question by that point, and one of the claimants was a fellow by the name of Easterbrook. He settled pretty quickly, but the other 2 gave them a few problems, and one of them happened to live close by, a fellow by the name of Simeon Crandall. He was unfortunate enough to live close by, so the Claimants Association sent some agents out, and they brought Crandall down to their offices, which was actually a picnic table in a clearing. It was left over from the 4th of July celebration. And that was their offices, and they stretched him out on the table and prepared to read him their declaration. And of course, he didn't think that he needed to hear that declaration, so he actually managed to escape. But unfortunately for him, there was an old hound dog that was on the side of the Claims Association, and the agents went and rounded him up and hauled him back, laid him out on the table, and they forced him to hear their declaration. It went with something like this: whereas certain persons not residing in the county unjustly and in defiance of the rights of early settlers of the county have entered the claims of those who, from unforeseen and unfortunate circumstances, have been unable to protect themselves. And as Chauncey Brown has chosen to seize upon and enter lands embracing all the improvements of Widow Peck, it is resolved that we will defend and protect each other, that we will prevent any and all persons from taking possession of the lands thus entered by Chauncey Brown Jr., one Easterbrook, and Simeon Crandall, and use our best endeavors to punish any person or agent of such persons who shall attempt to take possession of or improve such claims. That was their declaration. So he had to listen to that, and now we've had a chance to. And what happened at that time was that he sort of, Simeon Crandall gave in eventually and sold back the claim. But this fellow Chauncey Brown was a different case. He had taken Widow Peck's land, and so the association finally he found out that they were after him. So he went down to Sauk City or Sauk Prairie and hid out there. And it was there that the association found him one dark night. They'd gone to the Widow Peck and they said something like this. Well, the Baraboo Claimants Association is informed of your particular aggravation. Mr. Brown got his mind set on usurpation. He could use a little claimant re-education. When you find yourself in a no-win situation, you deserve a fair share of compensation. So don't be the victim of intimidation. Join the Baraboo Claimants Association. So they caught up with this fella Brown. Oh, one dark and stormy night. We'll have some harmonica, the horn section, to help us out with this. I know there's a five-piece horn band coming up later, so I thought we're going to be up for that. Now Eben left home for the gold fields. I'll return with a fortune, he cried. And though many were slain in that Indian raid, no one ever got proof, even died. As so Rosalind defended the homestead from the scoundrel they call Chauncey Brown. And when he'd been warned of Mrs. Peck's scorn, packed up his bags and left town. Sing that back to me. When he'd been warned of Mrs. Peck's scorn, packed up his bags and left town. So they chased him as far as Sauk Prairie. They roused him one night from his bed. They threatened to hang him from yonder high tree. They rolled him in the mud where he'd fled. Ain't nothing, I'll sign back the deed, says he. I'll sign it back now in a flash. Yes, I'll hand back that land that should rightly be yours, if you'll kindly hand over the cash. Sing that one too. I'll hand back the land that should rightly be yours, if you'll kindly hand over the cash. Trusted that cash to some agent. She figured she'd been through the worst, but that rascal Brown won his case in the courts, 'cause a contract's no good when it's forced. And Rosalind Peck lost her house and her land. That agent never paid back a cent, and she borrowed enough to start over again, and repaid it at 50%. That's right, yes, she borrowed enough to start over again, and repaid it at 50%. Oh, yeah. All right, poor Rosalind. All right. Well, it was 1844 when the territorial legislature organized Sauk County, and they decided they said that the county seat would get to be the town that had made the best offer to the territory, and it was go between two of the cities, either Sauk City or Prairie du Sac, and. Well, Sauk City put up the Bryant Harasti House, which is worth about $3,000, and Prairie du Sac put up several village lots, which were worth quite a bit more, they figured. And so the first courthouse went to Prairie du Sac, and you can see there's a nice picture of it over here. It's 2 stories high. There's the offices down below, and the court was upstairs. And later this would be used, the building would be used again as a school and as a shop. And when it got too broken down, they tore it down and used the rafters and built a barn with it. So they knew how to reuse and recycle in those days. But in 1846, when the state of Wisconsin was trying to become a state, and they were trying to come up with a constitution, there was a vote that came through to move the county seat here to Baraboo. And a fellow named Prescott Brigham loaned the money out to buy a whole quarter section, a lot of land, And they called the town was called Adams, after President Adams. And they used the land sales, and they built a new courthouse and the jail that we told you about earlier that Abe would escape from. And they called the new courthouse, as you can see it right here behind me, this is the Elephant, they called it, because it was the wonder of the pioneers, as you can imagine, seeing it now. It was the elephant. An elephant, of course, was something that was very exotic and just amazed people, and I think that probably attracted the circuses here later on in Baraboo history. But they called this one the Elephant, and it was used for a lot of different functions. It was used on, when it wasn't being used as a courthouse, it was used for school functions and for dance functions, and the occasional funeral or kissing booth. There's one famous incident when a church group came. They had a meeting that was booked at the Elephant, and there's a dance group that was also booked at the same time, and as often the case, it was the fiddler who cast the deciding vote, because he started up with a lively tune, and the dancers commenced dancing, and the church folks sort of melted away into the night. Do we have any lively dancing during that? Hoping we would. All right, well, of course, this was built as a temporary structure. They were going to build a more permanent courthouse, but in those days, they never knew who was going to get to become which part of the county would get to become the county seat, because that was a very important role, because people would come to town for meetings, and of course, they'd want to go out and do things at night, so it would bring people into the area. And I guess the folks up in Reedsburg started to become a little jealous of the position of Baraboo after a while, because they started something that became known as the Reedsburg Saw Log War. They built a dam up on the Baraboo River, and they refused to let any saw logs or saw rafts pass over their dam that belonged to Baraboo. And well, people down here in Baraboo found out about that, and they said, well, what's going on? So they put together a delegation and went up to Reedsburg, and they sent out a couple of delegates. They kind of looked like a mob, so they thought, well, let's just send out 2 or 3 people, and it'll look like they can go out and find out what the story is. And so they sent out these representatives, and after a while, the representatives didn't come back for a long time. And so the people in the delegation decided, well, we better go and check out, see what's going on. And they went up to this clearing by the dam, and they were out there having a big feast. They were having a big party, a big picnic, and the Reedsburgers are sort of thumbing their noses at the Baraboo crowd. So the delegation returned to town, but they started to get pretty mad. They got hopping mad, and apparently the next time they went up there, they went up as an armed mob. Of course, when you're armed in those days, it included knives and tomahawks and pistols. And they had along with them a deputy U.S. Marshal heading up to Reedsburg, and the Marshal was pretty quick to assess the situation, and he had the dam torn down. Well, the Reedsburgers weren't very happy about that, especially since they had called the Marshal to sort of make sure that there was no violence would happen. And so they had the Marshal arrested, and they locked him up in jail. And after a few hours, some cooler heads presided, and they thought, well, maybe it's not such a good idea to arrest a federal marshal. And so they let him go. But apparently there was a plot for a while that the Reedsburgers wanted to create 3 new townships up north, and so it would look like Reedsburg was in the center of the county, and they were prepared to take over. There's no evidence that this ever actually came to be, but that was one of their plots. But eventually, Baraboo was established as the county seat, and that was called the Reedsburg Saw Log Wars. Whenever there was any major conflict, they'd use the word war for it, like they did with the Bearable Whiskey War. I don't know if you've heard about this Bearable Whiskey War. This was started by some ladies here in Baraboo, and the ladies were rather upset because some of the local taverns were serving the husbands, and some of these husbands would become very violent when they'd be drinking and take it out on their families. And so the ladies would go down and they would plead with these tavern owners and say, you can't, don't serve this person alcohol anymore because they're becoming very violent. And but it was hard to reason with tavern owners. They're pretty interested. If you ever tried to reason with a tavern owner, you know what I mean. Maybe no more reasonable tavern owners than they knew. But everything was this went unresolved until such a time one of the husbands actually drank himself to death. And so now they had a widow and orphans that they had to deal with, and the ladies were becoming very irate. And it didn't help that the local Methodist preacher said that the taverns should be struck down with the thunderbolts of heaven to punish them. And there's a lawyer Pratt, who said in a private conversation, I don't think he meant everybody to hear this, but he said he would like to see all of that liquor poured out into the street. It was on a Tuesday morning, long before the sun would rise. 50 women broke in at the Wisconsin house. No, they did not yell surprise. They hauled out all the barrels filled with bourbon, rye, and wine. They rolled them to the street and cracked them wide open, and the men just stood around crying, saying, whiskey, she's a devil, that whiskey, she's a treat. But you better not mess with the Baraboo women, 'cause they'll pour it all out in the street. And then it's over to the grocers. He tried to lock them out. They offered to buy every bottle in the place. It was fair and just, no doubt. And as they bargained by the front door, some others broke in around back. Beer and much more poured out on the floor, and they busted every bottle in a rack, saying, whiskey, she's a devil, whiskey, she's a treat. Better not mess with the Baraboo women, or they'll pour it all out in the street. So on down to French Pete's barroom. He swore he'd stand his ground. He fired his shotgun into the air, and those fine ladies scattered all around. And by then a crowd had gathered, the men all spoiling for a fight. And it could have been blood and whiskey in the streets, but the sheriff stepped in to set things right, saying, whiskey, she's a devil, whiskey, she's a treat. And you better not bother these Baraboo women, 'cause I'll pour it all out in the street. And so the ladies all pled guilty. They prepared to serve their time. Judge Wheeler set damages at $150 plus a $30 fine. And a gentleman passed the hat around. They collected every dime. They said, well, let bygones be bygones. Let the whiskey flow like wine. The whiskey, she's a devil. The whiskey, she's a treat. But you better not mess with the Baraboo women, or they'll pour it all out in the street. The whiskey, she's a devil. Hey, whiskey, she's a treat. Better not mess with the Baraboo women, or they'll pour it all out in the street. Now the third courthouse, that's this one over here. A little more austere looking thing. It was built. This is the what they called a brick courthouse. They built it out of brick so it wouldn't burn down, and it cost them $5,000. They're afraid they're going to bankrupt the county, but they didn't. They got enough donations to cover the cost of it, $5,000. And this old one was used as, they always reused everything. It was used as a newspaper office for the Republic newspaper. And then when it got too dilapidated that newspapermen wouldn't go in there, it was used as a saloon. And it's one of the buildings that burned down in a spectacular fire that happened on the 4th of July in 1859. This fire burnt down a bunch of buildings on one of these sides of the square. And so that was the end of that one. And there was a new jail was built also, a new hexagonal jail, the jail that we would think of in the old jail here. All right, well, it was, and that new jail lasted 70 years. It lasted really till the 1960s. Is that right? Yeah, sometime there. Anyway, Wisconsin, now the state of Wisconsin had always been opposed to slavery. This is a non-slave state, and it was very much involved in the abolitionist movement. Wisconsin was the first state to repeal the Fugitive Slave Law. This is a law that said if your slaves ran away across the border to a northern state, you're allowed to cross the border and come back and haul them back. But the Wisconsin Constitution said there's no slavery here, and so the state declared that federal law. They repealed it. They said there is no fugitive slave law here. And so it's no surprise that when Abraham Lincoln ran for the presidency, he ran in a three-way race, that Sauk County went 70% in favor of Abraham Lincoln. And so when the war began, the Civil War, the war between the states, Baraboo was one of the first towns to gather together. They met in the new brick courthouse, about 3 years old then. They met in the courthouse and organized a militia that they called the Sauk County Riflemen. The Sauk County Riflemen, and they elected their officers. Of course, the militia were organized from below, not from above like they are now. And they went out recruiting. They took the Raleigh's Town Band, which I think they're going to play later on in the night. I'm not sure. But they took the Raleigh's Town Band and they went over to Reedsburg and did some recruiting down there, and they did the same thing in Merrimack that same week. And by the end of the week, they had 77 recruits who were willing to go out for Abraham Lincoln. He had called for 75,000 troops to serve for 3 months, to go and put down this rebellion for 3 months. And so they waited to get the call to head down to Madison, Camp Randall. And the people in the towns would organize these picnics and these public events and dances, and the militia would march from town to town, and show some of their drills, show off their drilling, and they'd have a band, and they'd have a cakewalk and ice cream social, all that kind of thing. And they didn't have any barracks, of course, that were built. The people in Baraboo, the families actually would put up these recruits in their houses, the ones that were from out of town. And shortly thereafter, word came down that President Lincoln had enough troops for the 3 month, to go out for 3 months. They needed troops that would go out for 3 years. So in a very dramatic meeting, everybody gathered at the courthouse again, and the captain told them that if any of them thought that they needed to be at home, no one would think any less of them if they decided that they had to stay and take care of their families. But not a man stirred, and every one of those recruits stayed on. And so they had 108 of these recruits when they left. There were 2,000 spectators. It was the biggest gathering in Baraboo to watch the fire company escort them to the train. And the train took them down to Camp Randall in Madison, where they're given their uniforms. And they were no longer the Sauk County Riflemen. Then they received the colorful name of Company A of the 6th Wisconsin Regiment. And there were actually 10 companies. They're from all over Wisconsin. There's one from Juneau County and several from Milwaukee County. Milwaukee had a company that was all Germans, and they had another company that was all Irish immigrants. So from these different neighborhoods in Milwaukee, they'd come. And they all got together. They were sent to Baltimore. And down there, while they were there, they got into a scuffle with the Plug Uglies, which was a gang out of New York City. and who sort of sort of invaded their camp in the middle of the night. But they held their own, even though they didn't have any weapons. And there was only one casualty. Was one of the soldiers fell into a pit that they had dug as a latrine and broke his leg, and so that was a pretty big joke for him for the rest of the war. He had to try and live that down. He was the only casualty. But they gave him they gave them all their weapons, and they joined the 5th Wisconsin and the 19th of Indiana. They tended to keep people together by their states and their areas, and they became one of the most famous and fiercest brigades of the fighters of the entire Civil War. They were called the Iron Brigade. Iron Brigade, we're the Iron Brigade. In the heat of fiercest battle, we shall never be afraid. We're the Iron Brigade. Iron Brigade, for liberty, for Lincoln, for country, hearth, and kin. We must beat that devil rebel, we must fight him till we win. Oh, we marched to Alexandria to guard the railroad tracks, and we marched to Cedar Mountain, there we held the rebels back. And we marched right into Gainesville, we beat Andy Jackson's best, and it's there we earned the title Iron Brigade of the West. We're the Iron Brigade. Iron Brigade, in the heat of harshest battle we shall never be afraid. Oh, we're the Iron Brigade. Well, we fought 'em in Antietam, and we fought 'em at Bull Run, and we fought 'em with our cannons, with our bayonets and guns. And we fought 'em, held on at Smith Mountain, all our ammunition gone. We stormed them in our pontoon boats in Fredericksburg at dawn. We're the Iron Brigade, yeah, the Iron Brigade. For liberty, for Lincoln, for country, hearth, and kin, we must fight that devil rebel, we must fight him till we win. So on we marched to Gettysburg, 160 miles. The roads all hot and dusty, and the springs and streams gone dry. Where the battle joins at every turn, fierce fighting on all sides. Some of us might make it home one day if this battle can turn the tide. For the Iron Brigade, the Iron Brigade. Yeah, for liberty, for Lincoln, for country, hearth, and kin. We shall fight that devil rebel, we shall fight him till we win. Well, after the 3 years were up, most of the soldiers of the Iron Brigade came back here and went back home, and others stayed on to fight through the end of the Civil War. I don't know if you know about that war at the North. The Union won that war. That's how it turned out. And so the Union was saved, and the country felt like it had finally grown up, and it was able to, it had gone through a civil war that had almost split the country in two, and had stayed through that. So people started to get a little bit more serious about that, about everything at that point. And they started to say, well, we do need a system of laws and justice. And this probably is an important thing, that we abandon the ideas of frontier justice and dueling. And maybe we should let the courts solve some of our disputes. And so the country did get serious, and in 1871, 72, the railroad came through, and Baraboo and Sauk County started to grow pretty quickly. Now, in about 10 years after that, the courthouse really had reached its capacity. The offices were all filled, and they had vaults where they stored all the records, and of course, every time something happened, they'd have more records, and they pretty much filled the place up. So they voted on, they were going to have two new wings. They thought about building a new courthouse, but they built an east wing and a west wing, or they voted on an east wing and a west wing, but they could only afford one of them, so they built the west wing. And as you know, a bird with one wing always flies in a circle. So they didn't call it a wing. They called it the Annex. And they built this Annex, and then they a few years later, and they built a brick privy out back instead of the old wooden outhouses. People appreciated that. And in 1890 they built a new jail. That was when the jail was built that would last until the 1960s. Now, once they got the idea of indoor plumbing, they thought, well, they should have indoor bathrooms in this new annex. But there weren't any rooms to have bathrooms, so what they did was they dug a cellar out underneath of it and put the restrooms down there. Now, any of you who have ever built a house, you know that you dig out the basement first and put your foundation there, and then set the building on top of it. But they did this the opposite way. They sort of propped up the building and dug out a new basement underneath there. And so that didn't help the structure of the building at all. There were cracks in the walls and there was falling plaster. And by 1901, they decided that they needed to start to think about getting a new courthouse built. They had a plan for a $50,000 courthouse, and that plan was scrapped. It lost by a vote of 20-14. So, well, the next year, 1902, it was almost 2 years later, actually, and they came up with another building, not for $50,000, but this was for $75,000, and that had one more vote. It lost by 19-15. And in 1904, there was an incident where like a yard of plastering fell from the ceiling of the Clerk of Court's office, and where they had dug out that new basement, there was like a 1-inch crack between the old building, the annex, and the old brick courthouse. And there are other cracks that were maybe a half-inch wide, smaller cracks, just a half-inch wide, going all the way from the roof down to the ground. So they knew it was time to do something, and they came up with an idea. They were going to build this new courthouse. It would cost $100,000, and they voted on that, and the vote was a tie, 17-17, until one fellow changed his vote, and then it was 18-16, and that's when they voted to build the new courthouse here, the 100-year courthouse that we're celebrating today, and they're going to build it. They're going to have to tear down the old one, but it did burn up in that fire we talked about in the very beginning. That was an interesting phenomenon in the early days of Wisconsin, that sometimes buildings would mysteriously burn when they needed to be replaced. Now, this is the new courthouse that they built. It was a 100-year-old courthouse. They'd already built some different things. They built a poorhouse because some of the criminals just were too poor, and they'd already built they built the new jailhouse, of course, we just talked about, and some of the people just were mentally unstable, and so they built a new asylum hospital for them. And so it was time to build that new courthouse, and the people got together. They sang this song again. Gonna build a courthouse, one that's sure to stand. Gonna build a courthouse, if it costs $100,000. Build a brand new courthouse in the middle of our town. Build it out of steel and stone so it won't burn down. It's gonna have electric light, we can work all day and night. It's gonna have a steam heat, you can warm your nose, you can thaw your feet. Modern plumbing on every floor, we won't have to go to the cellar no more. And life could be so great, we could be right up to date if we built a courthouse. Yeah, one that's sure to stand. Gonna build a courthouse, it'll cost $100,000. What? Build a brand new courthouse in the middle of our town. We'll build it out of steel and stone, and it won't burn down. Cause the county built a poorhouse for the ones that always lose. County built a jailhouse for the ones that break the rules. County built an asylum for the ones that can't cope. This time we built a new courthouse. Don't act like such a dope, we're gonna build a courthouse. Think I made it clear we're gonna build a courthouse, and it'll last 100 years. Build a brand new courthouse in the middle of our town. We gotta build it up real quick before the old one tumbles down. Build it up brand new, we'll burn the old one down. All right, thank you very much. Thanks, Paul.
You know, if history had been like that in school, who wouldn't have enjoyed history class a little bit more, huh? Thank you, Chris, for that really engaging look back at early Sauk County history and Sauk County justice and what led up to the building of the courthouse that we celebrate tonight. Now, as you pass by the lobby today, you may have noticed the time capsule contents from the 1905 capsule are on display. That again was taken out of the building last summer. I fully think that most people in 1905 didn't think the courthouse would last 100 years and that we were meant to find that when we were tearing the building down. There's also another time capsule in the northwest corner that remains sealed. But anyways, we will be putting the time capsule back into the date stone and putting 2006 on the other side of the building. And so some of those contents are on display in the case as well that'll be going into the time capsule for the next 100 years. The old contents have toured the county for the last year at various libraries and other facilities, and will then find their home at the Sauk County Historical Society, which incidentally had its start in the basement of the old courthouse. The county board was kind enough to give the fledgling organization a room in the basement, which grew into several rooms, and finally we were kicked out in the 30s when they needed some of that space. Those who brought about its construction 100 years ago, from the populists to the politicians to the plasterers, I'm sure would be glad to see it standing today and know that their efforts continue to be appreciated. I would like to close this portion of our program this evening with the words of Justice Robert G. Seebecker, former circuit judge and state Supreme Court justice at the time the building was finished, and he was the principal speaker for the dedication of the building 100 years ago tomorrow, and I think his words still have meaning today. Let us not lose sight of the striking fact that in the history of the world that our form of popular government furnishes a sound basis for the social conditions of our age. Look where we will, nowhere and under no form of social organization do people feel such an abiding assurance of the safety of their persons and the protection of their rights. This is largely due to the fact that every citizen has the assurance that he is admitted to participation in the conduct of his public affairs. It is the security of this privilege which gives to the citizens of our republic the commanding ground in directing the affairs of the country. To sustain and promote this condition rests with them. Its preservation is committed to a just and enlightened public spirit, which will consult the interests of all and permit nothing to fritter away the benefits of a well-regulated and united popular government. I know of no better testimony that the spirit of good government still persists among us than a steadfast devotion to our local popular institutions. It was under the impulse of such a spirit that this building was erected as a monument to the enterprise and loyalty of the people of Sauk County, and it will proclaim to the world that they labor to perpetuate the blessings of the institutions they now enjoy. So that'll close our Courthouse Centennial celebration for the most part. Special thanks to the members of the Courthouse Centennial Committee, which was a subcommittee of the Arts, Humanities, and Historic Preservation Committee of the County Board of Supervisors. I'd like to thank them all for making this event possible. And I would also like to thank a few other people, Kramer Brothers of Plain, Wisconsin, who opened the Cornerstone last year and who will be helping us to reseal it sometime later this month when the capsule goes back. I'd like to thank the Model A Club and the Wisconsin Capital Model T Ford Club for bringing some of their vintage cars. You may have noticed them across the street in the parking lot. I'd like to thank the Sauk County Historical Society for research and displays, and also the Al Ringling Theater for providing this rain date location. Incidentally, the theater sits on the site of the Wisconsin House, which was the first hotel raided by the women back in 1854 during the whiskey raid. So if you smell something in here. And the first courthouse here in Baraboo was just about 3 doors down the street where the Square Tavern sits today. So we're kind of in historic territory here, even though we're not in front of the actual courthouse tonight. The Centennial Committee also saw fit to have a book produced on the Sauk County Courthouse Symbol of Progress. That will be available. 1,000 copies were printed, and that will be available at the West Square building as well as the county libraries next week. So you can get a copy at your local library.